Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and we're continuing that series today about bringing back reels from the dead. And this one's been our poster child. It's a Penn Long Beach 259, also known as a live bait caster. If you haven't seen it before, don't worry. It's a relatively rare reel. It's kind of a Franken reel in the Penn designs, in that it shares a lot of the parts with the Penn Jigmaster. It shares the gearing with the Long Beach. And it's pretty similar to a Penn Surfmaster 250, with the exception of the single screw take apart on that side plate there. So I'm going to continue with this one. The first time you saw this thing, it had all line in there. It still has the corrosion on it. And today we're going to work on how to rebuild this mechanically. And then we'll finish this one in a series in a little while about restoring the bright work. But if you're not familiar with the Penn Long Beach 259, but you have a Surfmaster, or if you have a Jigmaster, follow along and you can use these same steps to rebuild those. So we're going to start with this, the side plate. You'll notice I have a glove on and it's got a lot of oil on it at the moment. This was a heavily corroded reel. We're not quite sure what happened to it. It probably sat in the bilge of a boat for a while. However, I did prep this reel with a couple of doses of WD-40 around all of the screws on the side plate, on the rails, on the reel seat, on the handle, and hopefully we're going to be able to get these screws out without breaking them. So if it's breaking, we're going to have a different title to this video, but for now we're going to start by taking the handle off. And for those of you that follow me, I use a parts tray to hold all of those small parts. I do use the protective glove. It's a latex glove, just because the oil and contamination when you work on the reel is an awful lot. Why take chances? And especially in a reel like this, you really don't know what's going on the inside of it until you open it up. So I'm going to take the handle nut off. The way I like to take handles off is by backing off the star drag, as opposed to trying to wobble off the handle and pull it off. It looks like we're going to need drags here. I anticipated that, so I do have new drags. So as part of this service, I will show you how to replace the drags in a Long Beach reel. And we're going to get lucky here, it looks like. Yep, oops, we got a little turn going on there. It looks like the WD-40 did its trick in terms of loosening. And once you break those screws, it looks like they have loosened up. And it's going to give us a good chance to, all right, there you go. 4 out of 6 so far. We're lucky. Can we get the last 2? Okay, got the last 2. Now when you're taking these off, I'm just kind of haphazardly throwing those into the parts tray, but you do need to know when you reinstall that the two screws on the bottom, which go into the reel seat, those screws are shorter than the side plate screws. All right, we're going to do a follow-up video on this in terms of how to restore the bright work here. I did one on how to clean up the junk on a seriously corroded reel earlier in the video. If you want to go back and look at my channel, you'll see that. I'm going to go and replace all of that. I've determined to do that, and the reason I can do that is the parts from the Penn Jigmaster fit this reel, and I have some extra parts there. So for today's demonstration, we're just going to show you how to restore this reel. If we look in the back, it doesn't look terrible. So this looks like it got caught in the gun wall or something, just left there. It's just totally dry, hasn't been lubricated. I'm going to take a guess that because of what I just saw on the other side, that the drags are no good. So we'll go in and we'll work on those as well. So in order to work on that, we want to remove the bridge. There's 4 screws on the bridge. They correspond to the 4 screws in the back here. I'm going to go take those off. Now these screws are different as well. The 2 on the top are partially threaded, and they're partially threaded because there's springs that this free spool lever pushes down to disengage the free spool. And then the 2 on the bottom are fully threaded, and I'm leaving them on the table right now rather than putting them into my parts bucket, just so that I can show you the difference on the threading of these screws. But remember that when you go to put this reel back together. And again, this is a Long Beach series reel. It's the 259. more commonly you'll see the Long Beaches as the 60 or the 65 or the 66 or 67 or 68 Long Beaches. This is the 259, but it shares the bridge assembly, and it shares the other components, a lot of the other components with it, including the drags. All right, so once the 4 screws are out, I push the bridge plate through, and what I'm looking for there is to make sure that I didn't lose the spring. In this case, it's an older type of a structure which has a flat spring as opposed to a coil spring, but if you cup your hands when you're disengaging that old piece, you should land in your hand and not somewhere else, and that's always a good thing, right? All right, so we've got a case where we have a very dry reel, which kind of goes along with the theme here. I'll put the bridge down for a second just to show you the difference in the 2 screws that are the bridge. These go up top with the partial thread, the full threads go below. And we'll start by servicing this. Now this is a very dry reel, so the first thing I want to do is take the pieces off. So to do that, I press down on the spool gear assembly, and then I make sure that the release is up top. I disengage the spool assembly, and we can see that the bone dry, and then you'll see the 2 springs that I was talking about that ride on those screws that have partial threading on them. And now we're back to the base side plate. If you had a broken spring here at this point, you would have to take this assembly off, push that through in order to disengage that spring and replace that, but this spring is working fine. So I'm going to hit that with a little bit of WD-40 very quickly. WD-40 is a general purpose oil-based degreaser and oil. It's also wet dry, that's the WD, right? So I like that product a lot. I think a lot of folks that work on reels like it. It's just one of those things. If you hose your reel off with fresh water at the end of your trip, which is what you should be doing, if you put WD-40 on it after that, it'll keep that reel free from contamination and free from some of the problems that we've seen with this reel here, which have to do with the corrosion on the metal pieces and the drying out of the lubricants on the base. All right, so this is pretty much clear. You saw that I used the cotton swab there. I also use paper towels if I really need to. You might need some scraping. The side of a flat-bladed screwdriver can get away with getting some of that coagulated grease. I don't get my vocabulary right yet. And that's what I just did there, and then we'll pull that up. All right, now we got a clean side plate. Even though this is junk, we'll get to the bright work next time around. And once we have that clear, we're going to go ahead and lubricate that the way it should be, which is by using a blue grease. I use the blue grease on the moving parts. I use oils on bearings. So I'm going to make sure that that little bushing or spool cap in the back there gets its share of grease. Also up top, this is probably like a man in an oasis here. It hasn't seen the lubrication in some time. It's probably all too happy to see it now. Okay, these are dry, but I want to make sure that the contaminants are off of it, so I'm going to just take a little bit of steel wool and wipe those down to make sure that that's nice and clean. You want a nice smooth surface for easiest operation. I'm going to do the same thing on the collar that holds the spool gear. And these reels are probably 30 years old or more maybe at this point. So they were made with metals that were made to last, and this cleaning up, there might be some discoloration, but the metal's in good condition. It's going to last another 30 years if you keep it properly maintained. And we're going to get lucky here to be able to restore this one, which is what I wanted to show you as we're doing that. Okay, so then a nice liberal amount of grease, but not over greasing. And I'm just going to make sure that we don't have junk inside there, so I use the Q-tip just to push that through. Okay, so we can reinstall this now. I'm going to check those gears on the the spool drive while we're at it, and it doesn't hurt. Put a little bit of grease on there and let it work itself around when it's operating. Okay, so we're going to go back and grab those two springs that you saw. Those two springs sit in the indentations in the side plate. The collar and the carrier go next. Important to note that when you're doing this or any Long Beach reel, that the gearing up top has a channel in it. That's so that the back of the spool, which has a notch in it, can ride on it. That channel must face up when you're reassembling the reel. If you put it back together, you have enough room in this reel to do that. The problem will be when you go to crank the reel won't respond because the spool's not grabbing the gear. Okay, and then we're going to just take that and hook that over the top as kind of reversing the way we took it out. And now we're set with a nicely lubricated front end. And then I'm just going to put a little bit on the top here because when we reinstall the bridge, that's going to be sliding underneath this portion of the bridge. Next up then is the drag service. We start by taking the collar off, or the ferrule, and there's a little collar washer that goes, and then there's all of the drag assemblies. So sometimes these are tight, sometimes they're not, and these drags are actually in pretty good condition. So I would say that this problem with this thing getting on the junk pile was because the exterior was not taken care of, but also I'm noticing that the drag washers underneath here are totally brittle and they're broken, so they're ineffective and must be replaced. Okay, that's in good condition. The next one's broken as well. So I kind of thought about that when I thought that we were going to be doing this, and then the final one as well. So this is an indication of what happens when you don't do regular service on a reel, and when you neglect servicing the drags. You know, drags aren't intimidating. You just need to know what you're doing with them. But if you don't service them properly, they're going to dry out, be ineffective, and then your reel will fail because of it. Okay, so this is in good condition. The back of it is in good condition. We put that down. Get rid of the broken ones. You can buy drag washers online from Penn Parts for the most reels are about $1.50 each. And if you buy them, you'll be able to match them up to your reel and be able to continue using that reel for some time. I use cow's grease for the drags. It's a good way to keep them lubed, and you won't run into the problem that we had on the other ones. Also, the newer drags have an HT100 kind of a function to it. They're much better than the original drags that came with it. So the way that these lay out is the fabric one goes down first, the metal one, a fabric, a metal, a fabric, and then that collar washer, and then the ferrule. That's the way that they're installed. And again, I anticipated that we were going to have this problem with the drags, just looking at the condition of the reel, so that's why these are ready to go here, and we're not going to fool around with the other ones right yet. Okay, so I'm just buttering up the second one. In the middle of the drag stack goes the one that has the points on it. That's always in the middle. You'll see a lot of different manufacturers from reels, even in the spinning reel sides. When you go to replace and service those drags, there's usually one that has that notched thing, and it always goes in the middle. Okay, last one on. Going in with the top one now. And just clean that screwdriver off. Okay, clean this collar washer off a little bit. And again, the metal ones, you usually don't see a lot of wear in there unless something has gone amiss, like it got dumped in the ocean or something, and it got sand in there, and it started to, be an abrasive force to it. But just clean that up. Put that back on. The collar, same thing. It will discolor over time, but just keep it clean. That's all that matters there. Make sure that there's no contamination on it, and then you're ready to reinstall. Before I reinstall, I do go to the oil here, and I do oil that pinion shaft. Now that's the same shaft that if you access it from the outside, which is where that little oil is on the handle nut, that'll keep that oiled as well. Okay, so in reinstalling, you push down on the spool gear, you turn the bridge backwards. It almost looks, it's counterintuitive, right, in terms of why am I putting it upside down, but that's the way you do it. Quarter turn to give you access to this last point here. You just take a fully threaded screw, which belongs on the bottom, come through that screw hole there, use the dog. In this case it's the flat dog with the flat screen, and that gets set in behind that bridge plate to hook in with one of these the pinion gear here, which is where the reverse works from. I'm going to grab that flat spring again. I'm going to reinstall that. That flat spring sits on top of the dog, and it wraps around the little plastic post on the side plate. And those of you that watch my videos know I tend to have a little bit of trouble with these smaller parts, but eventually I get them, and that's how it sits. So it sits around that post, sitting down, and then you complete your turn of that bridge plate, and you tighten down that screw just a couple of turns. Don't tighten it all the way because you want to line up the rest of these screws before you go ahead and do that. So on the side plate screws then, the partially threaded goes up top. And I like to do this like you do a wheel on a car, alternating the up, down, back, forth, kind of an X pattern. I don't have that one quite set. Okay, so if you don't line these up, a little centering pin can help you move it so that you have clear access to that. And that's what's happening right now. That little collar that holds the gear did not set properly. When the spring pushed down, it pushed off a little bit. Okay, I got it now. We'll go put the bottom one in on that side, and that leaves me one more for the top. And then once I have all four of those seated, which is what I have now, I continue to tighten down in that X pattern to make sure they're all snug and tightened. And right now I can see the difference in the drag already, and we have the new drags here. And I can tell that by the amount that the collar sticks out from the end plate here. Okay. So I'm going to reinstall the star drag. And once we have that down, we're going to test for operation. Now I have a fully functional reel, good as new, even though cosmetically it's still in a little bit of a difficult state there. And we're just going to put this back together now just to show you that we've completed that step of it. And if you had a pretty reel at this point, you'd be ready to go fishing again. In this case, because this series is about taking one off the junk pile and making it work. We're going to go make the bright work for another day. So I'm just cleaning up the spool at the moment. I'm going to put a little bit more blue grease on that spool shaft. I'm going to put the cover back on this. Then we're going to go back and tighten up the side plate screws. And again, remember that there's two sizes to these side plate screws. There's a long and a short. Okay, so I've got them sorted. The short ones go below. Looking for my centering pin again. The plate moved when I was doing that. Okay, so here we go with this. Tighten that up. Tighten the other side up. Again, just like the other one, I like to go in kind of an X pattern to keep the pressure the same. So, you know, if you tighten from one side to the other, sometimes they get out of alignment and they torque poorly. Small one goes in the bottom. The reason why the small ones go in the bottom is this reel seat, if you put the long ones in the bottom, you're going to have something stick out of the back there. And when they stick out of the back, they can snag the line. So keep the small ones to the... I think I'm not catching that for some reason, but we will. That's what happens when you fly blind. Alright, that looks like it now. There we go, got it now. Alright, and then finish these off in progression. Two more to go. And then next time when you follow the last video on how to bring them back, we'll do the bright work on this one. We're going to replace that because this does have parts common to the Jigmaster, and we're going to make sure that that we use those parts to make this pretty. We're going to use the crossbars from this to tighten this whole thing up. Okay, so we're working now, and there's a little bit of a noise here on that spool. There you go, that seems to have cleared it up. So we're working again, and like I said, we'll see the next part of this thing with the cleanup of this reel as the final step. But this is back from the junk pile. This is one that somebody was throwing away because of the corrosion and the fact it didn't work. We saw what the reason was that it didn't work, which was the drag stack. We replaced the drag stack and we put it back together to the point where you can turn it with no effort with a finger. So the only last part of this thing would be to put the handle on. Put the handle nut on. And again, if we didn't oil that pinion gear at the earlier stage, we would put a drop of oil in there now. And again, when you do your regular service, you want to do that as well. Make sure that it's there. We're going to use that handle wrench to tighten down that handle nut. This is an aftermarket wrench. Some folks have asked, where do you get one of these? They're available from pennparts.com. It's not a Penn part, it's an aftermarket part, but it is available there if you're looking for that particular wrench. And then the set screw for the handle. And again, we're done now. So we're in good, nice condition here. A whole lot different than it was just a few minutes ago. So if you've enjoyed this video, please like it. If you have any questions or comments, please send them to me. I answer all of those. If you want to see more of these, including the replacement of the bright work to finish this project, please subscribe, and when that's completed, you'll see that on the channel as well. So this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for viewing this video.